Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Simply Connected podcast, your go-to spot for discovering new connections. On this week's episode, we get to talk with Alexa, and this was a super fun conversation. We talked all about growing up together, having known each other since childhood. We talk about the power of connecting in nature and what it feels like to really come back to that grounding sensation. We talk about the power of therapy, pro therapy over here, and we talk about all of the importance surrounding protecting our energy and honoring the practice of self-care. It's a great episode, and I can't wait for you to tune in. Hey Alexa.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of the Simply Connected podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We are going to jump right into it because I feel like it kind of gets that awkwardness out of the way right away to start, but it's always the most dreaded question. And I'm going to ask you to tell me and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely a loaded question. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people answer this with like what they do for a living. So I think I'll just like start. I'm a bud tender. I know that there's definitely a stigma about the cannabis industry, but I have a lot of respect for it medicinally. So I love what I do. I love my customers. I've always loved having a job where I have regular customers to like kind of build a community around. But other than that, I love doing puzzles. I love taking care of my houseplants. I feel like I'm living my best like grandma life already at 30, freshly 30, very proud of it. Yeah, I love nature. I love the earth. For the most part, I live a quiet life. I am a homebody for sure. Definitely a homebody. I like to have like a pretty mild social calendar as much as I can anyway. I'm not usually successful, but
I feel like I knew that about you too, having known you for so long. I feel like anytime we do hang out, it's very much chill, homebody. Yeah. On the couch, blankets, movies, just coffee, always coffee, always coffee. I feel like whenever we do hang out, and we haven't hung out like overnight in a while, because we were infamous for like good girls' night hangout sleepovers during the pandemic, but it was always first night would be like the pleasantries, movie night, pick a movie, make something good, eat a whole lot of crap, sleep, and then the next day when we both woke up, it was the cup of coffee. Either like end of the couch,
the deepest chats you've ever had in your life.
Yeah. Go right down to the nitty gritty of like tears and trauma and anything that we need to talk about. We just like aired it in that room, and then by like lunchtime or early afternoon, we'd be like, okay, what do you want to do today?
Right? I know, like that coffee and social aspect of like being able to sit with your coffee and kind of just like enjoy the social aspect of just having a chat over coffee. I don't know, there's something about it. It's like, it's one of those things that like opens you up kind of in a way.
Yeah, I feel like too, like the warmth of the coffee just like settling into your system, but then it's kind of like that settling, that nurturing effect, but then having someone you trust so deeply to be able to confide in. When we did have those conversations, it was just like all the therapy that we needed.
I was gonna say like pseudo therapy, like being able to sit and have like that coffee that for me is such a comfort, you know, like I feel like a lot of people feel that way, but like the comforting coffee on the couch with the blankets, still in your pajamas, and like a little cozy, like waking up in the morning and being able to get into those deep chats. For sure. And
I feel like too, coming out to your place, you having moved out of the city over COVID too, your home is like the perfect coziness vibe, like out in the middle of nature, not a whole lot of traffic around. It just gives you that essence of you can be at peace here and you feel safe.
And the seclusion, like I call it my little bubble, right? Like I like to be able to retreat to my little bubble away from like the chaos of the world, because no matter where you go, there's some sort of chaos happening somewhere around you, whether it's traffic or noise or people or whatever it is. I like to be able to just sort of retreat to my solace and just sort of enjoy the peace and quiet and just it's nice.
It's nice that you have that, especially too when you talk about like the craziness of the world. And I feel like things are always changing and there's just so much being thrown at you. Like you said, whether it's the everyday traffic or just the world in general and the ever-changing climate of what's going on. So when you think about how your life has been going lately, has there been kind of like maybe a recent high and low that you've experienced?
Definitely a recent high, but I think I'll start with like recent low. I don't even know like how long ago it was, but I definitely had a mental health diagnosis come up in the last couple of years that was definitely like turned my whole life on its head, you know, like not to get too much into the thick of it, but like a dissociative disorder diagnosis really made me realize that like my reality was not what I thought it was. And it really shook my world to a point of feeling like I was completely crazy and like I didn't know what my reality looked like anymore, or what was real, or what was like a figment of my imagination, or what, you know, just generally trying to sort of find my footing again in this new reality that I was suddenly aware of that I hadn't been in my whole life. And it definitely took me to the brink of like a breakdown for sure. So I was definitely struggling with my mental health like very, very strongly, but I was lucky enough to have already been in therapy and have that resource to tap into to like find my grounding and stability through that sort of chaos. And I feel like I've come out the other side of it just with a lot more knowledge and tools in my toolbox to kind of navigate that low, which definitely took me pretty low. But I feel like on the heels of any low point typically comes a high point, and I definitely had that when I started a new job that I loved, like love my new job, and it really, really changed my life. Like, it is the best job I've ever had. I love the community that I feel I'm a part of now because of that job. I met my partner at that job. I just have this whole new life in front of me, and this whole world opened up to me when just like the smallest little thing happened that started this domino effect of all of these things mounting into like, oh my God, I'm living like the life that I manifested maybe, or like always wanted or always dreamed of. And so I feel like I'm still living on a high right now of like, sure, there are always lows and bad days, but I feel like I'm just like living the high of finally living my life the way I want to right now.
And I feel like too, life is kind of all about those ebbs and flows, right? And as much as we hit those kind of those valleys, there's always a peak that comes back, and it might not be the biggest peak, but there's always something. And we touched on it a few episodes ago, just about finding those small joys that can really remind you that things are going to get better. And I remember talking with you early on before you had received your official diagnosis, and I feel like mental health and mental wellness has always been a topic of our conversations, just given the people in our lives and our own personal struggles and things like that. And thinking back to people in my close circle who have had diagnoses and whatnot, and are navigating what that looks like in their life. How has your diagnosis kind of changed your perspective on maybe not life in general, but on how you approach things?
Yeah, it's interesting because that was kind of part of the breakdown, if you will, that I was experiencing. Was like the dissociative disorder was essentially like realizing that my reaction to anything, even remotely overwhelming, became dissociate, whatever that looked like for me. There were a variety of different ways in which I would do that. And the breakdown that I sort of wound myself up in was realizing that like that was the reaction to everything, and it made me feel like somewhat crazy that I couldn't respond to an overwhelming situation. Normally I would check out, or whatever the dissociation looked like for me. And so now, being more aware of it, I really think just like awareness is the thing that kind of helped me the most, of being aware that that was my reaction, realizing when I was doing it. And it kind of actually, my therapist told me one time when I was sort of in the throes of this, the thick of the kind of like spiral after the diagnosis, of feeling so crazy, like I can't respond to anything without dissociating, or whatever the case was. And it felt like crazy making. Like I was like, how do I stop doing this? Like it's so instinctive. It happens right away. And she said to me, don't think of it as like a bad thing. Think of it as the friend that was there for you when you had no other coping mechanism. Like that was like your friend that helped you and held your hand through the hard times. And so don't think of it as a bad thing. And if it shows up, maybe it's just because your brain needs to. So I think the diagnosis more than anything taught me that like these sort of unhealthy coping mechanisms are a result of this trauma or that trauma or whatever, but it isn't necessarily a bad thing. And sometimes it is exactly what you need in that moment, and it's okay to allow it to exist as it is or as it needs to. And if that's the first thing that comes up for you, let it. Sometimes, you know, like there's such a stigma about unhealthy coping mechanisms. Sure, they're unhealthy if they're used all the time, but in that moment, if it's the only thing that can get you through, it's the only thing that can get you through. So definitely changed my perspective, I think, on a lot of mental health struggles.
Yeah. And I think too, to your point, not necessarily viewing it as a negative, and we've touched on this in the past, and how it can almost be used as like an outlet. And through many conversations, you and I have a lot of similarities in the shows we watch and the reasons we watch them and the books we read and why we read them. And I know for me personally, it is a way to, for lack of a better word, disassociate from what is going on in the world around us. And I feel like if I can put myself into a TV show, or if I can see myself in a novel, or even write myself in a novel, because being a big writer and losing myself that way, I feel like it's a way to kind of make sense of everything that's going on around us.
Yeah, and one of the things my therapist said to me too is like, you know, I found myself, there are certain things I unpack in therapy that I can't even really confront in therapy, this big trauma or whatever it is that I can't fully face, but I find myself really drawn to examples of it in media. So songs that talk about it, or like have a narrative about it, or shows or documentaries even that touch on something very similar, that like sometimes is so triggering I can't watch it or listen to it or whatever, but I'm so drawn to it. And my therapist was like, it could just be like a way of you kind of, I don't know, unpacking it or processing it indirectly. Being able to like see somebody else's story is like an indirect way of being able to unpack something or process something that you can't face because you can't look at your own experience, but that you can sort of watch somebody else's experience, and it's cathartic in a way. And I definitely identify with that, like the being able to escape into a world that I know isn't real, like a TV show or whatever, and sort of live vicariously through them and watch them like resolve all of their traumas or whatever. It's like cathartic in a way to be able to sort of process things indirectly in a way that I know that's fictional. It's not my life. It feels safe because it's distant from me. And so it's weird, but it works somehow.
It's those damn TV shows that get everything resolved in 45 minutes.
So satisfying.
So satisfying. That it gives you that's satisfying, but it's also like, why can't life be like this? Why can't I resolve this trauma or this conflict or whatever is going on with with these words?
Yep.
With
nice little button on the end, always a happy ending.
At the end of the day, just go to bed peacefully and be like, yeah, everything is good.
Yeah.
So when you think about this and kind of and how far you've come, how you touched on it briefly with the way you cope and the way you deal, how have people approached you in this situation, with now that you have a diagnosis, now that you're learning to navigate your life, how have people either shown up for you or not shown up for you?
So I think for the most part, this is kind of tricky for me to answer because I didn't tell a lot of people. Like I think there's that smallest handful of people in my life that I disclosed the diagnosis to and really sort of opened up to about it. And even some of the people I told, I kind of kept it just like, here's the gist of what I'm going through, but I'm fine. You know, I'm definitely the queen of like, everything's fine. We're going to be fine. Don't worry about it.
Classic. Everything's fine.
Yep.
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
When a female says they're fine.
They're usually not. But I definitely have, like, my partner's a huge support in it and like very open-minded. I think that's like the biggest thing because it was really tricky for people to understand. I remember when I told my mom, she had so many questions because she was just like largely confused, I think, by like the lack of understanding of it and so on. But just having people like even ask questions feels like a support because it feels like the absence of judgment when they're trying to understand, you know, it comes from a place of care. So things like that are really helpful, or like just listening. Like I think with my disorder, it's really difficult for people to know when it's happening. Like that was one of the things my mom said was, I never would have guessed. Like I never would have guessed that this was something that you were experiencing or a strategy you were using to cope, like because it's not externalized, you know, like people can't see it when it's happening. It's all inside my head. So it's difficult for people to support me or to help me or to approach me in a certain way when they don't know it's happening. I think what has been largely beneficial in my partnership specifically, because that's sort of the closest relationship I have where he sees it the most, kind of like he sort of is around when it happens. When it's happening, I usually am like so paralyzed that I can't articulate it, it's after the fact when I'm able to sort of talk about it and have somebody, like a safe place to land, somebody who's willing to listen, somebody who is doing their best to understand, and then somebody who after that can kind of start gauging when it's happening or when it might happen, or like when I might be triggered or something like that. Like just having people seek to understand is always the best way I feel supported.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, and it makes sense, right? Because I feel like too, not just in your situation specifically, but whether like with my sister and her mental illness, or even going through grief and trauma and things like that, I think the biggest thing people can do for you in order to support you through it is just learn, like seek to learn, and like almost don't be afraid to ask questions, or don't be afraid to talk about it. Yeah. I feel like the more you hide it or the more you bury it, the more shame gets placed on it. So I feel like even looking back on like the last little bit after my mom passed away, it was don't be afraid to, I know like grief is a different situation and it's icky, people don't know how to be in it, but it's like, don't be afraid to like talk about her. Like I love talking about my mom. I love sharing who she was. At the same time, when, again, not my story to tell, but with my sister, like when we first got her diagnosis early on, like we didn't talk about it because there was like that stigma attached to it. But now I'm just like, no, the more people who know about it, the more people who can support you through it, the more people who understand.
And it helps deteriorate that stigma, right? And I think that's so much of what the problem with mental health is that so many people have so much shame around it, or are embarrassed by it, or think they're going to be judged, or people think you're attention seeking or whatever it is. And so the less anybody else talks about it, the more you feel like you should be ashamed. Oh, I can't talk about this. It's not okay to talk about. Nobody wants to hear my story. And then it elicits even more shame that makes you feel worse about yourself, where when people are just asking questions, maybe they don't understand, maybe they don't know how to respond, but when they attempt to respond, it almost like validates what you're going through or what you're feeling, or like seeking to understand your illness is like validating in a way that like, I am a human, this is something I'm going through, and that's okay. You know, like it's okay to talk about it. It's okay that people don't understand it or don't know how to respond, but acknowledging it is a way to like validate that it's part of my humanness, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
And I think even too, the biggest thing that I've come to like accept and learn recently, someone saying to me, I don't know what to say, says it all. Like that's all they need to say.
Yeah, because like, it feels like they're saying, I want to say something, I want to help you, I want to be here for you and support you, I just don't know how. And like that's enough sometimes.
Yeah to have them like, to have you like then perhaps be able to like open those conversations with them, to be like, you don't know what to say, great, that's fine, like I appreciate you being here, I appreciate your presence, like I'll share with you. I'll tell you like what it is I need in this moment, or what I don't need in this moment.
Absolutely, for sure.
And I feel like too, I guess kind of on this topic, we spend a lot of time talking about connection and the power of connection, and what it means to us as a collective, and then as you as an individual. And there's been a lot of overlap in the definition of what connection is, because there is like the Webster's dictionary definition of it. But when you think about the word connection, what does that mean in your world?
So it's interesting. I think so many people gravitate to like personal connection and people. I'm a person who has always really cherished my solitude, and like to me, I feel healthiest in myself when I'm like not always connecting with people. I need my time alone, my quiet time, whatever. I've always felt the most connection to the earth as like a collective organism. Like it's like one big organism, and we're just like animals that help it function in its ecosystem. And that's just sort of how I've always viewed my connection in this world, is like my connection to the earth, our ecosystem, and like my place in all of that. So I feel the most connected when I'm in tune with that. Like when I'm like, to me, that's where connection feels the most potent to me, is when I'm connecting with like the earth, nature, my place in the ecosystem, like spending time like with my plants or in my garden, you know, like
that green room at your house.
Thank you. I just got heat out there, so I have plants back out there now. So it's been nice, you know, like that to me is what makes me feel the most grounded in any sort of connection. Like it makes me feel the most connected.
Yeah. And I feel like too, when I think about your green room or your sunroom, yes, sorry. That to me is like walking into nature. You're already living in nature, but when you walk into that space in your house, just the plants and the energy that's in that space. But it was also you that introduced me to the concept of grounding in nature. And I always knew it as this thing, but the more I came to learn about it and embrace it in my everyday life, bare feet outside, being by the water, being in a forest on a hike, all these things to me when it started happening was just crazy how much nature can like down regulate your nervous system.
Yes.
And for me, whenever I'm near water, which we've talked about astrology and whatnot before, but my chart is air, water with a little bit of earth. No fire in my chart.
Interesting. See, I'm all fire.
Which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But the second I started bringing myself closer to water, the more calm I felt,
and it's interesting because I always notice like the stark reality of this when winter comes around, because I have a wood stove in my house, and when I get to put on that fire and sit in front of the fire, like for me it's fire or earth, because I have a lot of both in my chart, and being able to, like, I've always been like the fire master or whatever. I'm always the one that puts on the fire, controls the fire, whatever it is, and that's always just been like a comfort for me. It feels meditative for me when I get to sit in front of the fire. Like I feel soothed by it. I feel like it really does regulate my nervous system. And then the same with earth. Like, I mean, obviously like the earth as a whole, but like to me, like the ground, getting my hands in the dirt, my feet in the dirt. Like I'm barefoot 100% of the time in the summer. I get my hands dirty as often as I can. And even just being out in the fresh air, like hearing the wind blow or the wind through the trees, it makes me feel so grounded. I almost feel like that's the only time I can connect, because when I'm trying to just connect with people, it feels sometimes a little manufactured or artificial. It feels like it's just part of like the cog of life, just like making you move through social interactions with people as a way to get through like the regulation of the day, where for me that just feels like putting your finger in a light socket, like, oh, I'm connecting. Like to me it's not soothing for me. I don't know how to explain it. To me, I really only feel like I'm like really regulated and connected when I'm in nature, or I've spent a decent amount of time in nature, which will allow me to connect better with people.
And I feel like that makes a lot of sense too, like knowing what I know about you. And it's crazy that you just kind of mentioned how you feel connected when you hear like the wind in the trees or whatever. As soon as you said that, I was like, man, when I hear rain, that's like calming to me.
I feel like everybody has something.
Yeah. I feel like more people need to look into their chart. I'm just saying.
I agree. I'm with you. I'm with you there.
So your love of being outside and spending time in nature, I know that goes kind of way back. For as long as I've known you, you've always been an outdoorsy person, whether at the cottage, just outside on walks in nature, on trails. When you think back to maybe little Alexa and what she was like as a kid, have you seen kind of any parts of little Alexa come back now that you're newly entering your 30s?
Yeah, so I think so. I think it's interesting because you and I talk about the Saturn return a lot, and I'm like 30, so right in the thick of it. I definitely notice at this point in my life sort of rediscovering the things that bring me like authentic joy. For me, it was always like you said, I was at a cottage growing up, and that was my happy place. That was the place, like I look back on my childhood memories, the happiest memories I have were at that cottage, barefoot, dirty head to toe, had spent the entire afternoon outside in the forest, like getting lost in the forest, playing with dirt, whatever it is, you know, like just getting dirty outside. I know it sounds so simple, but it's one thing that I've always, it's been a through line in what I look back on bringing me joy, always being outside and like getting dirty. Little Alexa, I think, was like a free spirit, kind of like a wild animal. Like I really,
she was wild.
But I feel like wild, sure, but like primal wild, like just part of the ecosystem of the earth. I know I'm like beating the dead horse, but really it just feels like the things that bring me the most joy have always sustained throughout my life. I've always gravitated to like living out in the country and, you know, having time at cottages, building fires and stuff like that. And I think all of those things have sustained pretty well and are the things that I prioritize the most in my life right now, for sure.
And I think back to remembering, because you've had two cottages.
Two, yep.
And I remember your very first cottage, and I know that's been a core memory for you as of lately too. Thinking about our time growing up there, because I've known you since you were born.
Yep, literally since I was born.
Literally since the day you were born. Our time spent at those cottages, or both, but the first one, I remember I have a picture of you. You might be like 4 or 5 with your pink stroller, and you're like standing in a sandbox or next to a sandbox or something.
Okay.
And you're just like standing there so proud with your pink stroller, and I'm like, this girl is living in the prime of her life.
Literally,
right now.
like, and it's funny because you look back on photos of me as a child and I look the happiest when I'm like outside in a sandbox, like with my bare feet or something. Yeah, for sure.
I think some of the best memories I have was probably when the 4 of us, so your brother and then my sister, would be up at that cottage. And anytime I think about that cottage, I think about the cottage, but then the bunk cabin, and the amount of time we spent in that bunk cabin. And for me, the 2 memories that I'll always take with me from that cottage was one, the haunting one that I'll touch on in a sec.
Okay.
But the one where we were always in that back room where it was the bunk beds and then the double bed or whatever.
Yep.
And we would start on the top of the bunk bed and jump onto the bed, like back and forth.
And was it with you that we broke it?
Yeah. And then one day we jumped so hard that the
whole bed just fell right through, and we didn't know what to do. We didn't want to get in trouble, so we took every single blanket in the cabin and layered it onto the bed in hopes of making the bed look like it was taller than it actually was. And my mom came in and in 6 seconds flat was like, what happened to the bed?
Yeah.
We were so sure this was going to be disguised. So sure.
Yeah. I just remember us landing on it too, and the thud of the bed on like the unfinished floor, and we're all just like, shit.
We knew what we had done.
Yeah. Oh my God. And then the other time, back when compact CD players were a thing, I remember, I think it was the 4 of us again.
Yep.
We were walking through the forest down the road from your cottage, and we had, I'm pretty sure it was Ricky Martin.
It sure was Ricky Martin.
Ricky Martin in this compact CD player that we were like exchanging the headphones so we could all listen to it.
We got a song each, and after your song you had to share the headphones. Yeah.
And walking down this path, and we get to kind of near the end, and there's this man standing there.
Ominous. Terrifying.
Like, I still can't see his face clearly.
No.
But we all kind of look at each other, and we just we're like, run. Yeah. And we like turn around and book it all the way back.
And he chased us, and our parents did not believe us that we'd had this terribly traumatic experience in the middle of the forest, this old man chasing us. We described him to our fathers. Our fathers jet off on the ATV to go track the man down, find a man who they described looking nothing like the man who chased us. Oh, he was just wondering why you were on the property. We were traumatized. Like, right. I still remember that.
And then that night.
Yes. And they still don't believe us, but I don't even know. Was that a dream? You're going to have to tell that
one. It could have been a dream at this point. I don't know, but I just remember being in that room because we were allowed to sleep together finally. And one night, because I remember your parents always made you go back into like the cottage to sleep, and we slept out in the bunk cabin. We were all in this one room with the broken bed.
Yep.
And I remember like going to the window of this bunk cabin at night. I don't know what time it was. And he was standing outside.
Right. And see, listen, to us, it was so real. To our parents, they were like, that didn't happen. That was a dream. You guys are crazy. But I swear
it happened.
It happened. And we're still terrified to this day.
See, it's still with me. So
like, it'll never leave me, like, no. Never. And you know what the funniest part is that I'll never forget that it was Ricky Martin that we were listening to. Never.
Oh my God, those 4 songs on repeat.
Yep. Yeah.
But I feel like it was just classic us, because even when we came to like your place for like hangouts or whatever, like our dads being as best friends as they were, we would always have a music on, because I feel like, at least for you and I, music runs deep regardless. Yep. And that started at a young age. But our dads and our parents always had music on, like nonstop to the wee hours of the morning.
Oh, for sure.
Something was playing on the radio. But we also like made up these little air band dances.
We sure did.
And it was just like a classic. Like I watch like TikToks now of like millennials, like when they were our age, like doing this. Like I had to put a show on for my families, and I'm like, oh my god, you know how many times we danced to Smash Mouth or Ricky Martin in your games room for our parents?
Smash Mouth was definitely a staple. Thank you for reminding me of that. That was one that we danced to all the time. And yes, our parents were absolute troopers because they sat and they watched every single time.
I mean, I'm pretty sure every now and again, like as we were dancing, like my dad's head would like come around so he could see the TV behind where we were dancing.
I'm sure.
Like core memories.
Yeah, definitely.
And I feel like this just all part of connection, right? Like just the connections we build growing up and taking those into our own lives. And I know for you and I, the connection started off with our parents being friends and them growing up together and whatnot, and that morphed into us becoming friends by nature, spending time at the cottage, being similar ages, things like that. But then in our mid to late 20s, developing our own friendship. And I know it switched, I guess probably in mid 20s for us, when I started coming up to your cottage without the adults.
Yes, when the connection morphed from being kind of thrown together because of our parents to choosing to be together. Because it's funny, like there are several children that grew up around us because our parents were all friends, but you are really the only one that, like, you and I are kind of the ones that stuck together and stayed friends and maintained our own sort of friendship. And it's interesting to watch the genesis of how we started off, like literally as babies because our dads were friends, and then growing, and we were always close and bonded but only saw each other when our parents decided to see each other, and then growing up and having the autonomy to be able to make plans on our own, and we would start going to dinner, or you would come up to the cottage. And it was when we put in our own effort for our friendship and realized, like, no, we're not just friends because our dads are, we're friends because we're friends and we can actually be our own friends.
Yeah. And I count myself lucky every day, and we say it all the time, but I just like knowing you is just like such a bright spot in my life. And
ditto.
It's just, I couldn't honestly imagine navigating these last few years, let alone life, without you. So
you're gonna make me cry. Stop.
A little pause to say how grateful I am for you and those treasured Ricky Martin memories and that we'll always have.
Likewise. And I feel like it's one of those, like, to your point of connection, we were sort of thrown together in a way where we, like, you know, I've always felt like you're like a sister to me because we grew up sort of as family essentially, and our connection has evolved in so many ways where we were sort of thrown together as sort of family members as children, and then we grew up as like teenage friends who tried to do like the teenage whatever together. And then you and I have both gone through like monumental shifts in our life, and you and I were really sort of each other's like support during a really tumultuous time for both of us in very different ways, but we were kind of on the same trajectory, and having each other in that moment to sort of go through all of the self-discovery we were going through a few years ago when we were like sort of on the same journey at the same time. It was like, I don't know how I would have gotten through that if I didn't have you by my side, and I didn't have somebody that like not only I love and I know and I trust, but that I respect and that I feel like I can reach out to anytime and stuff like that. Like, I really think that we got so lucky in having each other and like being thrown together for like because of our parents, but being able to maintain that connection, the two of us, and know that, you know, like you said, this year we haven't had a lot of those sleepovers, and our lives have changed so much that we've only seen each other a handful of times this year, but knowing that our connection is still so solid and deep no matter how often we see each other or how not often we see each other or where we're at in our lives, like knowing that we'll have each other no matter what is so crucial.
It's easy, just like pick right back up.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. No crying allowed on this podcast. No crying. Can you think of, aside from me, can you think of looking back on your life to date? Is there someone, maybe knowingly or unknowingly in your life, who's had a major impact on who you are? And I feel like for the most part, this question has been answered positively, but it could be positive or negative. Is there someone who has left an impression on your life?
Interesting. I'm glad that you defined that it could be positive or negative. So I have both. We'll get the negative out of the way first. I had a parent that definitely impacted my life and the trajectory of it in massive ways. But kind of like we said before, of like every time you have a low, it's kind of followed by a high. As much as that parent negatively impacted my life, my mental health, the way I operate as an adult, it's also given me the ability to kind of come out the other side of that and do my own work and process my tendencies, the facets of my personality that are a result of having that parent and the effects that parent had on my life. It's given me like a strength and a confidence in who I am and what I'm capable of to be able to kind of work through the effects of having that parent. So as much as it was negative, because there's a lot of negative effects of it, it's also almost like trained me to know that I can kind of overcome more than I'm usually aware of that I can overcome. And then I also had a teacher in high school who was I only had him as a teacher for 1 year, so it's crazy to say that he affected my life as much as he did, but I felt like he just like saw something in me, or he believed in me, or I was going through a particularly hard time in high school. It was not easy for me. I was a very depressed kid in high school, and I think he saw that in me and just like wanted to be there and support. And I think he also knew that my dad wasn't the best role model and was kind of like a father figure to me. And before he left, we knew it was his last year at the school. He actually transferred to your alma mater. So he started teaching at your high school after that. And it was his last year. We were super upset that he was leaving, and he signed my yearbook. And we all handed him our yearbooks that class. He spent the entire class signing yearbooks and had a stack on his desk. And I was eyeing mine the whole time. And every time he got to mine, he put it to the bottom and put it to the bottom, put it to the bottom until he was done every single yearbook in the class. And then finally opened mine. And I watched him take like a very pregnant breath before like trying to figure out what to write in my yearbook. And I can't remember what he made, like a little quip, a joke, but then at the end said, "I expect you to achieve great things when you grow up." And then brought me my yearbook and read it to me and said, "Do you see that?" I said, "Great things. All right, here you go." And did it kind of with a humoristic sort of delivery. But I don't know, it just stuck with me. It felt like this person like saw me when I felt like nobody else did in high school and believed in me, you know, even though I didn't have any faith in myself at that age. It felt like somebody believed in me, and that always stuck with me. Like I've never forgot the words that he wrote in that yearbook, and I definitely revisit that statement often.
Oh my gosh. Well, you are doing great things.
Thank you.
You
That's
are doing
so
amazing
kind.
things. And I love that. I feel like maybe not everyone, but pretty close to everyone who I've talked to so far has mentioned a teacher, whether in high school or post-secondary, that has had that impact on them. And I just find it so interesting that like teachers are amazing. Teachers don't know how amazing they are.
Yeah, teachers don't get enough credit for being as amazing as they are, for sure.
Yeah, but just, I don't know, it makes me so happy and like giddy, and my heart just swells when I hear about people like that who have indirectly changed your life or given you something to work towards or just believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. And
100%. And I think that's what it was like he saw something in me where he believed that I could achieve greatness and I did not. And it helped me like, oh, if somebody else sees that, maybe it's possible, you know, like it gave me a sense of sort of security in myself or confidence in myself that I just never would have been able to muster at that age, for sure.
Yeah. Have you crossed paths at all since?
No. So we like sort of kept in touch slightly for the rest of high school, and he was at our graduation, but not since.
Okay. Interesting. I'm trying to track down 3 of my high school teachers who have had similar impacts in my life.
Okay. Interesting.
And I haven't had luck so far, but with one of them, yes. Okay. The other 2 are, I feel like one got married, so their name changed, which is proving to be a little bit difficult. But yeah, I'm trying to track the other 2 down.
Listen, if you get a hold of any at Mama T's,
yeah,
there you go. There you go.
Right? And so when you think back to, I guess, the more negative impression that was left on you, we don't get to talk about this enough, but negative impacts do leave a lasting impression. How, thinking about that, how do you hope to navigate that narrative as you move forward?
It's definitely something I still work on. I think just my therapist has helped me really be able to delineate like his voice versus my voice, you know, like the negative impression especially when it's a parent and it's how you were raised and it was so much of your life, it becomes your embedded narrative. And for me, I didn't know that that wasn't my narrative, that it was embedded in me from an external kind of source. So for me, it's been really helpful to like stop and think when I notice that narrative coming up. And now that I can kind of define what the negative impacted narrative is, I can sort of stop and like stop myself in my tracks and really ask myself, is this my voice or is this his voice? Because 9 times out of 10, if it isn't his voice, it's my voice that has been so influenced by that impact. Mm-hmm. So again, just awareness is really like the biggest. I think saying that all I want to do is bring awareness to the narrative, the negative impact, the mental health, whatever it is, gives a lot of grace for people who think I should be able to fix this, or I should be able to operate differently, or this narrative is wrong, let me change it to this narrative, because that's not always the easiest thing to do for a lot of people. And sometimes it's not possible to do in certain scenarios. So being able to tell myself, like, just being aware that his narrative can be present, or that these negative effects maybe aren't my opinion or aren't my own narrative, and that I'd like to develop a new narrative, I'd like to approach this differently, but that maybe right now I'm not capable of doing that, is enough for me. Just like bringing the awareness to all of those aspects.
And I think that's huge too. And you've mentioned it a few times in conversations that we've had about being aware and self-aware and things like that. And I think your outlook and your handling of it is so beautiful, in the sense that you're not trying to force a change. You're just aware of the bigger picture. And I think you can take that with you into so many instances, whether it's navigating family dynamics or friendships or like work relationships, right? We're so often quick to take on people's feelings and stories and narratives as our own, that we have a tendency to just want to fix and change, and not always disregard our own feelings, but we do lean into that because we want to make other people feel better. And for me personally, I've learned the hard way, but I'm coming to be more aware of when I'm sacrificing my own personal wellness for the sake of others, or taking on their stories as mine when you don't necessarily need to. So I think navigating your situation in that way is huge, because then you're not also putting the pressure on yourself to change or to fix or to do whatever it is that you want to do to help this person along. You're just looking after yourself.
And I think that's a lot of where the struggle comes in, right? Like with the pressure applied by whether it's yourself, like for me, for the most part, it's myself putting pressure on me. Like, well, if I'm aware of what the problem is, I should be able to fix the problem. And my therapist is constantly reminding me, like, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. You just need to meet yourself where you are. And if where you are is you can't overcome this hurdle right now, be aware of it, acknowledge it, move past it, and try again next time, you know? And like being able to give yourself that grace, that compassion, that patience is so important, to not feel overwhelmed, self-shaming, self-gaslighting, like you're doing something wrong by not being able to overcome a certain circumstance or conditioning or whatever it is. Like, it's been 30 years leading up to this point, and my therapist is constantly reminding me, like, this was 25 years of your life. You're not going to be able to fix it in 25 days. That's not how this works. You know, like, you just like, you know, take it slow, calm down, give yourself patience and grace.
And we're so like quick to wanting that fix, like that immediate gratification or that immediate change, that it's so important to remember that all the little things that you're doing are helping, right? Like, it's not easy. You can't just cut someone off. Well, you can, but that's not like, it doesn't leave you with a good feeling.
It's not beneficial to like cold turkey anything, you know. You got to kind of like unwind the thread, as my therapist would say. Yeah.
So having all those like building blocks helps lead towards like better outcomes. And when you think about navigating this situation, but kind of all situations, how do you go about surrounding yourself with people you know are going to lift you up and help you move through these things?
So that one's been tricky. Like probably my biggest hurdle recently has been overcoming like codependency and feeling obligated to a person or a situation, or, you know, if I don't go see this person, they're going to be upset or whatever. And I just feel it. Like, I don't know, I'm a very empathetic person, so I know when I'm not feeling right, when I'm feeling icky around a person, and I feel the mounting anxiety when I have to go have an interaction with a certain person that might not be the best for me at that time. And it's been really, really hard. It still is, and it's something that I'm still working on constantly, but just like knowing where my limits are and where my lines are, where my boundaries are, and knowing when I need to take time and just being vocal about it, not making excuses or like trying to like sugarcoat it. You know, I just had a situation with one of my best friends forever where I was like, you know, I just think that we need some space from each other. I think that we are in two different places and can't really support each other in the way we need support in these different places. And I think it's probably more healthy for us to take a little bit of space than to put pressure on each other to meet an expectation that neither of us can really meet right now. So I try to just be honest. Like, I have to do the work to be honest with myself a lot of the time, because my codependency or my people pleasing or whatever gets in the way, where the first instinct is to be accommodating to somebody else. I don't want to upset anybody. So-and-so wants to hang out. Well, I should really go. I have to be very mindful of where my energy is and know, like, oof, if I'm dreading it, making plans next week, how about next month? Like, are we free next month? Can we wait a couple weeks to simmer and try next month? And just being honest with people, they're usually pretty understanding. And a lot of people, I find, the reception is typically that they're in a very similar place. I feel like society applies a lot of pressure for people to like be in each other's lives in the same capacity they always have been, and they feel bad or like a bad friend for not being in a person's life in that same capacity, even though they're just in a different stage of their life where they just don't have that in them right now. So I'm just like, sorry guys, I'm tired. Like, I need a couple weekends to do nothing. I'll hit you up when I'm not tired anymore, you know? Just being honest.
And I think too, like, that's relationships, if they're sustainable, move in and out of that, right? Mm-hmm. I think about some friendships I might have had when I was in my teens that, yes, some have like dwindled off, but there's some that have remained consistent, but we're in each other's lives at different phases. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that we don't care about each other or whatever the case. It just means that I know you're going through what you're going through. I know maybe you're building a family or transitioning a career or moving away. I'm still there for you, mm-hmm. but we're just not there in the same way. And I feel like even our relationship has ebbed and flowed like that over the years. And it's just so important to remember that taking time for your own well-being and energy and sanity is just as important, because then it allows you to show up more wholeheartedly for the people that you care about and the friendships that you want to maintain and nurture. Mm-hmm. That's why I feel like too, sometimes I'm guilty of chronically saying yes even when I don't want to, and I'm really working on it. Like, I've definitely gotten better, but also not feeling guilty when, say, the thing rolls around and I'm just not into it, being okay with canceling.
Like, that's something I'm still working on.
Like, I do still over explain, but I also, like, I'll catch myself sometimes in the moment being like, I don't need to explain myself to this person. Like, if we're as friendly as we think we are, then they should get it. And I get if it's like a big commitment that you've agreed to and whatnot, like, that's a different thing. But if you're just like having a movie night, you're just like, oh, I just can't summon the energy to do this, why show up? Like,
because then you're just depleting yourself. And I feel like that's the marker of like a true connection and like a solid friendship, where you're okay with that when somebody messages you and says, I don't have it in me. Because when I care about a friend, I want my friend to be well and healthy and like have the energy to come hang out and want to come hang out when they come hang out. And if they tell me they don't have the energy, I want you to stay home. I want you to nurture yourself and do whatever you need to do for yourself. And like you said, you know, our relationship has ebbed and flowed, and recently we've both been super busy and we've been, you know, starting new endeavors in our life. And it's like, I love that for you. I love that your life is so busy that you can't make plans with me. And I love that you're like on these new endeavors. And I know that the feeling is mutual, and that's how you just like feel comfortable and solid in a friendship. And I feel like it makes it more healthy to take that time to focus on your life, yourself, whatever it is you're going through. And it makes it feel more stable that you know that you can take that time from a friend and know that they're still going to be there in the same capacity when you have time again. And like, it makes it that feel like a safer place. And the people who aren't okay with that, and you usually end up kind of tapering off from, generally that's a sign that that's not a friendship that was going to serve you long term. They were there for the season, and the season's over.
Yeah. And I feel like, to your point, as long as it's reciprocated, right? Like, I want to be cheering my friends on. I want them to be getting married, starting new jobs, starting new passion projects, like going on these trips. I want them to be doing that. But I would expect the same in return if this is a two-way friendship, right? And so if they get busy or they're entering a new chapter of their life, like, we can keep that same level of so happy for you, so proud of you, we'll get together when we get together. But it's also to being conscious of like maintaining that friendship, right? And reaching out occasionally to just be like, hey, like, thinking of you, hope your trip to Bora Bora went well, like, right? Like, just making sure that they still know that you're there. And then, to your point, also the ones that aren't, you know, that those are kind of fizzling out for a reason. There was no like foundational basis to that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Has there, again, this can be like recently or not recently, has there been maybe a person or a scenario that you've had to navigate in a similar way that maybe your values or your priorities weren't aligning in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just kind of gave you a bit of an example with prior to this, but the aforementioned parent, it's really difficult to navigate situations with a person who's also not doing their own work. Like, it's so much easier when you have somebody who is doing their own work and who can be self-reflective and think about what their role in something is. And this parent is just not capable of that. And so I've gotten good at setting my own boundaries and, you know, saying like, this is what I'm doing because this is good for me, and here's an alternative compromise that could be good for the both of us. And when that's met with passive aggression or spiteful behavior or whatever, it can be difficult because you can definitely feel like, oh no, I misstepped, I upset them, or I did something wrong. But just reminding myself that like, I have to do what's best for me in these moments, despite what I know the reciprocation to that will be. And I know that it's not going to be met with what I'm hoping it'll be met with, but I still have to stay true to myself and what is right for me and what feels right for me and my energy levels. Like, I don't have the energy to engage in certain dynamics. And so this is where I'm at and this is where I'm willing to meet you. And if you can't follow suit or, meet me in the middle, then that's more of a you problem than it is a me problem.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, that's like, to your point of you just saying that, I've said it a couple times more recently to a couple people, and maybe it didn't come across the way I was hoping it to come across, because I've caught them off guard a little bit, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'm just being like too blunt. But there have been instances recently, both in my like familial life as well as my friend groups, where their feelings are getting projected. And me being fully open in my chart, am very susceptible to taking those things on. And doing the work right now and setting boundaries for myself and really trying to be me, I've said it not this way, but in similar ways where I was like, they're like, oh, what did they say? Something like, don't make me feel bad or something like that. And again, maybe it was too blunt, but I was like, I'm not making you feel anyway. And I'm like, those are your feelings. I'm like, you can feel that way, like 100%, but like, don't put that on me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not responsible for the way you feel.
And I don't think that's being blunt at all. I think that's totally fair. And I think because you're so open and susceptible to how other people feel, you feel like you're being blunt because they're like, oh, they might be a little offended. But again, that's a them thing. And you are well within your rights to be like, your feelings are your responsibility, not my responsibility.
And it's funny you said that too, because even thinking about the situation, I remember I was talking to him, and he had said it. He's like, don't make me feel bad. And then right away he heard himself saying that, because I have said this to him before, and he's like, right away, and like that, you know, when people's voices go higher because they're trying to mimic you, and he's like, I know, he's like, you're not making me feel bad, like I'm making myself feel bad. And I'm just like, so you said it, you realized it, but I'm like, also too, like, I'm entitled to my feelings. So if what you're doing is making me feel bad, like, also own your part in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it's really hard to navigate dynamics where somebody isn't willing to take accountability or look at themselves, and they put everything at your door. Then you're not only responsible for what you feel in that scenario, you're responsible for managing whatever they've just laid at your door that doesn't actually belong there. And being able to set the boundary to separate yourself from whatever they've laid at your door can be really, really difficult, especially when that person is so close to you. Like, I know the person you're talking about is, right? So it's difficult to navigate those dynamics with those people. And at the end of the day, like, that's what I remind myself with my situation. Like, whatever he feels as a result of the boundary I've set, what I've asked for, what I've said, how honest I've been, is 100% his responsibility to deal with. And if he wants to lay that at my door, I can leave it there and walk away from it, because it's actually not mine, and it'll still be sitting there on the ground, and he'll have to deal with that at some point, you know?
Yeah. And it's also too, like, your boundaries are your boundaries, but you've told me this, your boundaries are allowed to change.
Yes.
As Absolutely. You grow and evolve, right? So while other people might not like them, it's not their job or responsibility or even like whatever to change them. Like, it's not up to them. Yeah. But you're allowed to change yours.
Yeah. And I think it can be really difficult, especially for people pleasers, to allow their boundaries to exist when they upset another person. And if that other person needs to step away because of a boundary you've set, it can be extra difficult, where you're like, oh no, like I made them run away. But they have that choice, number one. Number two, if your boundary changes to accommodate whatever they need in that moment, they can come back and you can welcome them, just like, okay, what you needed in that moment was to take space from me when I needed to set a boundary, and that's totally fine.
Also, again, too, to that point, I feel like there's so many building blocks I can take off what you're saying, but this is just the way we work. I think remembering that when you set those boundaries to protect yourself, while they're really hard and that person might choose to walk away, if they choose to come back, like, it's also okay to be like, you chose to leave the situation. Now I'm going to need some space to process this.
Absolutely.
So if our values aren't aligning right now, like, it's on both of us. We can both do whatever feels right to us in that moment. But like, you can't just come back into the picture and be like, everything's fine.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
I feel like growing up that way too, for me, in our house, it was a lot of, if there was conflict, if there was an argument, if there was whatever, it was one person to like walk away and just like wipe their hands of it. We're like, we're not dealing with this, it's over. But then they come back like nothing happened.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where, at least in my life, where the hesitation to conflict does arise from, because now where I'm at in my life, I want to talk through things. I'm like, don't text me, call me. Like, I want to talk about this so we can be on the same page. And I think that, like, it, again, to your point of maybe the other person not necessarily wanting to grow and do the work for themselves, like, that's where you can kind of hit those bumps, right?
Oh, or a wall. It sometimes feels like, okay, nothing is going to be productive here if you're not willing to join this conversation with me. If all you're interested in is placing blame and saying that this is all my fault because you refuse any accountability, then this isn't a conversation I'm willing to have, because there's always two sides. There's always, you know, there's give and take everywhere, right? And if you're not willing to engage with that, I think, to your earlier question, like, removing those sort of, like, you know, protecting your energy and not being around people that may not benefit it. If you're not willing to sort of engage in that back and forth with me, I'm not really interested in that relationship. Yeah.
And so finally, before we wrap it up, let's close off our energy. Let's protect our energy. I know you've touched a lot about being in nature and how you find that grounding. Are there any, how do you make sure that you, aside from nature, how do you make sure that you kind of maintain your overall well-being, whether it's through hobbies, whether it's through hangouts, things like that? How do you make sure that you look after yourself?
So interestingly, probably the opposite of hangouts, time alone. Like, I've really realized that time spent completely alone without anybody else around. Maybe doing hobbies, like the hobbies I have are very solitary. Doing puzzling, very solitary. I don't like anybody to help me with my puzzles because my OCD needs to do the entire thing start to finish all by myself. Or taking care of my plants, like going out into the sunroom and doing like plant chores and stuff like that, for sure. It definitely feels like self-care in a way. But even if it's just laying on the couch watching TV, eating junk food, which is not really caring for myself, but if I'm doing it alone and don't have to put out any energy and I can just restore my own battery and sort of like recharge, silence, solitude, doing nothing, talking to nobody, having like a full weekend start to finish where I do not have to get out of my pajamas at all. Time alone is really like the best way for me to protect my energy and to really recharge the battery that can be depleted so quickly because of the energy that's swirling around me at all times.
Mm-hmm. I think too sometimes like extroverts, I don't know if you'd classify yourself as an extrovert. In my world I do, because we're very yin and yang in our energies and our behaviors, but for me I'm surrounded by extroverts all the time. Like it's just who my circle is, but I feel like that is also a good thing for me because it brings me out of my shell. But it's also remembering too that like extroverts need that downtime too, right? Like they need that time to unplug. It might not be as long as an introvert. Like I can go days without wanting to see anyone, but like you need that space to just do the things that you like.
Yeah, see, it's funny. I feel like you and I have like swapped. I feel like you're so social and all over the map right now, and I'm like, just leave me in my house with a blanket and a show or a song or whatever. My mom likes to call us omniverts, so like introverted extroverts or whatever. So I definitely have both in me for sure, but it's so imperative for me to have that time alone, doing nothing, talking to nobody in the quiet, to have the energy to be extroverted or social in any way.
It's honoring that too, right? And I've come to honor that, being a social being now and wanting to be out. And I feel like I'm living my life a little bit later than I had anticipated, given my 20s. But coming out of those situations too, and just to your point, allowing yourself to be in that stillness and with your thoughts and with the things that bring you joy, and not feeling pressured or obligated to overexert yourself in a society where we're always doing.
It's such a high demand, and I think that time alone gives you the space to figure out what you want and what you enjoy and what you have the energy for and where you want to put that energy that you do have. Like I think that's what's, you know, when I'm go all the time, I'm just, yeah, sure, I'm going here, going there. I know how to schedule my day really well. I know how to time manage really well. I know how to get it all done in a day. I could have like a fully packed calendar and be able to get it all done and do it well. But I'm not even going to be able to think straight. I'm going to be so tired after. So having the time to just like be at peace is the only way I can recoup.
Yeah. All right. So before we end the episode officially, few fun rapid fire questions, because it's just fun to learn these things, even though I might know most of them, but we're gonna hit it anyway. What was the last TV show or movie that you watched?
Oh my gosh, Christmas movies? Like, is that allowed? I have an entire list of Christmas movies.
Who are you talking to?
Right? Okay, but I'm not the Hallmark Christmas movie girl. I'm just all the Christmas movies. I think my favorite one this year was the cartoon Grinch. I will give that as that one's my favorite. The new cartoon Grinch, the best.
I will say some of the streaming platforms are coming out with like pretty good.
They're pretty good.
Christmas movies.
They're not bad. Yeah, but the Grinch was my favorite one this year.
Cartoon
for sure.
The Grinch. What are you currently reading and or listening to via like a podcast?
Okay, so podcast, because I'm not reading anything at the moment, I don't think. So podcast, Armchair Expert. I took a long break. I haven't listened in a year and a half, 2 years maybe.
Wow.
Yeah.
You listened to that like religiously.
I was very religious for the first like 3 or 4 years. But yeah, I took a very, very, very long break, and I just got back into it only a couple weeks ago maybe. And I've been sort of dabbling with a few episodes here and there, but I'm feeling it again. So
okay. Have you had a favorite guest with Dax?
Yeah, of course, Anna Kendrick. It's their most listened to episode, so that's what actually got me back into it, because her first episode was my favorite. Very relatable, very intense, sort of emotional reaction to that one. And they had her on again recently, and so I went to go listen to the episode, and that's what kind of restarted it. Yeah.
Oh, fun. Who or what inspires you?
Nature. Really, nature just inspires me like endlessly. The beautiful scenes, like a sunset, can move me to tears. A flock of birds flying over. Now that I live out in the valley where I do, I literally saw a bald eagle scoop up his meal and eat it in the tree across the street from me one day. Like, I almost cried. I was ready to call in sick to work so I could sit and watch it all day. Like, I love just nature. Really, everything about nature inspires me to just be a part of it.
Yeah. Favorite meal?
Oh my gosh, this changes so much. Like, I feel like this changes seasonally and based on my mood. But if I had to pick like a go-to, I would say, oh my gosh. Okay, I have to pick two. A favorite snack would be like chips and dip. That's
Classic.
kind of a staple. And then a favorite meal, pasta, because it's very versatile and there are a variety of different pastas that I love.
I feel like I knew that about you, pasta girl.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
Okay, this has also changed, but I feel like the through line is always just like, so it used to be like, don't seek external validation, just like find your own validation within yourself. But that's kind of morphed into like, find what makes you happy or what brings you joy or what you want to do and do that. Stop living your life for other people, which I guess ties like somewhat into the validation thing. Like, just live your life for yourself. Do what makes you happy. Don't let anybody else's opinion of that change the way you would live your life.
Which is also so hard.
So hard. So especially in today's day and age with social media and all of that, like, it makes it so much more difficult not to compare your life and your whatever to other people and feel like you're doing it wrong. But air quotes for anybody not watching. But yeah, I definitely feel like it's really hard, but it's something that I have made a priority to work on in my adult life and something I wish I would have been more aware of at a younger age, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And if you could have dinner with one person, living or dead, who would it be?
Okay, I'm going to choose somebody living. Okay. I did think about this slightly, and this might sound corny, but Jane Fonda. Guys, not because I loved the workout videos, okay? She is an incredible environmental activist, like one of the biggest powerhouses ever for environmental activism. And like, she's been like arrested at protests growing up as a young woman and is now in her 80s, maybe even pushing 90, and just going as hard as she ever did with as much fervor and passion and confidence as she ever did, you know, from her 20s. Like, she is, I think it's something a lot of people don't know about her, that she is an unbelievably powerful activist for the environment. And that's something I'm extremely passionate about. And she is like just such an inspiration to me. So
wow.
Probably Jane Fonda.
I'm one person who didn't know that.
Oh my gosh, like go down the Jane Fonda rabbit hole now, because she is such a powerhouse. Like you see her passion and her drive and her strength in what she does, and it like will sometimes move me to tears because she is just amazing. Love her.
I've heard her speak before. She has a few well-known like clips on social and being a keynote for some things, and she does have a very powerful like aura to her when she's speaking on a specific topic that has really like impressed me and moved me in ways, but I did not know that about her. So
yeah,
cool.
She's a pretty rad lady.
All right, well, let me know how that dinner goes.
Oh, thank you.
And then last question. So around here we have the Simply Connected playlist that we have available on Spotify, and we like to ask our guests what they're listening to. You, I know, a music aficionado. If you could add one song, maybe I'll allow you two, to this playlist, what do you want to tell our listeners to hear?
This is such a hard one for me because, again, my music taste depends so much on my mood. Right now I've gotten back into like slow, moody, folksy kind of music. So Boundary Run is an artist I've been listening to a lot right now. And I mean, everybody knows Noah Kahan. He's amazing. But one of his songs, Forever, is like a repeat for me, so maybe that one, Forever by Noah Kahan, and Going Under by Boundary Run is my favorite at the time. So I'll pick two.
We'll add them both.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me for an episode. As always, love talking to you. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll talk soon.
Yay.